Hi, I'm Kara, life coach, wife, and mom to 4 incredible and unique children. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and confidence that once felt so lacking. I created the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves feeling trapped and with no one who really understands. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle your ability to dream. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you are a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Before we get into the community huddle, I want to share with you a little bit about a brand called Cozy Earth. This brand has partnered with me to partner with you on getting the softest things that you will ever feel on your body or on the bodies of those that you love. I want to tell you about 2 specific things that I think you should maybe consider starting with, which would be the Studio Jogger. I can't even tell you how soft these are. They are perfect for the lifestyle that we have. And also the Women's Studio Light Crew Neck. So it's a nice accompaniment. Also, the softest thing that you ever will feel. Okay, now the timing of this episode probably is going to have you thinking about Christmas shopping, and I want to have you consider that these products would be really good Christmas gifts, and their slogan is, wrap the ones you love in luxury with Cozy Earth. So they have agreed to give our community an exclusive up to 40% off discount code, and it's going to be SNM Podcast, Special Needs Mom Podcast, and you can use that to buy for yourself, hopefully, and those you love. Okay, now let's launch into our community huddle. Hello and welcome to the Special Needs Mom podcast. Today's episode is a community huddle style episode, and consider this the kind of episode that you make yourself a cup of tea or cup of coffee and you sit around with the gals and you connect. I know that sounds so idyllic, and that's not how our lives usually look. You might be racing to an appointment, but that's the picture I want you to have in terms of the experience that we're generating in this episode, in terms of being with one another in a meaningful and connecting way. The topic that we focused around is kind of a follow-up conversation from the previous episodes in the last month or so about loneliness and grief and all of the things. So I thoroughly enjoyed being with these women, and I know that you will too. If you are wondering, like, how did these ladies get the goods on showing up to this community huddle, and you want to participate in something like this as well, you are going to want to get on my email list so that I can let you know. That is how I update people that are not in my paid for groups. But this is something that I offer the community at large and would love to have you join us. All right. That feels like a great place to launch. So with that, welcome to the Community Huddle. Good morning and welcome to the Community Huddle. We're going to start with introductions. Like I said, my name is Kara. I'm the host of this podcast. I have children ranging from age 17 to age 7. I just love that there's a 10-year gap. It just feels so neat and buttoned up for me. And my 14-year-old son is my disabled child. He became disabled when he was 2 with the occurrence of his first brain tumor. And our diagnoses include vision impairment, hemiplegia, panhypopituitarism, hypothalamic obesity, cognitive impairment, impulsivity, that's a big one. And our newest to the club is autism. So I have to do kind of like a body scan to think about like all the different areas that he's impacted. And a little bit more about me is I am married to my college boyfriend, Dan Riska, and we're just about to celebrate our 21st anniversary. And to start this episode and kind of to give us more robust introductions, I thought we could all share something that has us present to some of the aspects of grief and loneliness. And for me, I shared a little bit with the girls before we started recording that in the last week, my son lost his school that he had belonged to since he was in kindergarten. And so there's a lot of complex emotions, a lot of grief, a lot of anger, a whole lot of anger. And it was not a choice. We were definitely not steering the ship in this decision. And so being kind of pushed in the land of unpredictability and unknown, not of our choosing, enter in grief and anger and all the feelings that we often have in all the different aspects, whether it's medical or behavioral of special needs parenting. So that's what I wanted to share to start. And so I'll ask each of you to do similar type introduction so that as we get into the conversation, the listeners can kind of get a context of where you're coming from in your stage of life. So, Shantay, will you go first?
Sure. Hi. So I'm Shantay Hindia. I have two kids. I have an 11-year-old neurotypical daughter, and my son, who's 8, is autistic. And I live in California. I've been working with Kara for oh my gosh, over a year now, which is so helpful.
We
But
should celebrate anniversaries. Sorry, anyhow.
balloons.
Yes, flowers or something.
Yeah. But I guess in terms of your question, I took the kids last weekend to a water park and we did a whole thing. My daughter's best friend was there and we surprised them. So it was 4 kids plus the parents. And it was great, but I walked away, a little sad because you see all the kids and they're running around, like freely running around. The parents are kind of just sitting back, chatting, not paying attention really. But I couldn't quite do that. I still very much had to make sure that he was okay and that he wasn't overwhelmed. And, you walk into a room and you think of like all the possible triggers, like it could be too loud, it could be too crowded. You got to kind of brace yourself and plan for what you need to do if something happens. So there was a little bit of grief there. Like, I think he had an amazing time, but will it ever get to the point where I can sit back and let him freely run around this huge space and not worry? Like, I don't know. So it's my recent moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think what really stands out to me is the everyday nature of that. It was more of a whisper of grief and more of that like constancy that this is always there part of your life. And I think, if we go back to the episodes where, hopefully a lot of you that are listening now will have listened to some of the previous episodes on the topics specifically of loneliness and grief. But I think a lot of people kind of look at it as like this big event thing that happened to cause grief. But you've described something that I think we are all experiencing so deeply. And it's those little whispers of those everyday moments that we have this recognition of something that we don't have and we desperately would love to have. So thank you so much for sharing. All right. Alyssa, will you go next?
Yes, I would love to. So my name is Alyssa Meyerhofer. I live in Minnesota. I am a wife to my husband, Adam, and then we have 3 kids. So we have a first grader, a preschooler, and then Gabby is 2. So Gabby has trisomy 9p. So it's super rare. There's like 340 people in the world. So you go to appointments and they're like, we don't know anything. Like there's like one resource from Europe on it, and that's it. So she's globally delayed. She has like a slew of like other medical issues. She wears like a hip brace for like 12 hours a day. She has enlarged brain ventricles. So we don't really know like what her plan is going to be in life. Like if she's going to walk or talk. I think she will walk, but she may need assistance. And she's just kind of starting to use a gait trainer and a little more independently. So that's exciting. She's kind of been up for like 45 seconds a day on her own, like crawling up into it. So that's exciting. I'm a nurse. We live on a farm. So my husband does corn, beans, and hay. And that's about it. Oh, I'm writing a book. So that's super exciting.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
But I think to answer your question, I think like the grief and the loneliness. So like right now, I would say that I'm having less of that. And I think that's because we're seeing Gabby's having like these huge strides right now. So she's physically doing more and like using her gait trainer more. I mean, definitely you go through like those ups and downs, right? So she did intensive physical therapy in January for like a whole month and then refused to come home and use her walker for like 8 months. And so she's just starting getting back. You know, we have like a lot of these exciting things going on, and she's verbally trying to get more out. But then, you know, other things that are affected. So like right now, she's like she was impacted with stool over the weekend, and then like she's full of stool. So we're doing like a huge bowel prep this week. So like out of any of my friends, no one, I mean, my other kids had constipation issues, but like no one that I know of personally has had to put their kids through like a bowel prep and like clean them out completely. You know, so I think like when I was talking to people about it this week, it was like, oh yeah, that's a lot, you know. And then it's like a 4-week program we have to do after we clean her out. And so I think like I was good. And then on the way home one day, it was just like, this sucks that we have to deal with this as a family, and like just how it like affects your other kids and the mental load it takes, I think also like, and how it affects everything else you're trying to do. So I think that really, and then you know, like when you go through those situations, you're trying to like best navigate it for yourself and your family, right? So we live in Minnesota. I'm a nurse. So if anybody is like involved in the healthcare program, like healthcare in general, have you ever heard of Nurse Blake? He's like a comedian. He's really funny. And he's coming here on Friday or Friday night. And so I had like planned to like, we were going to go out to dinner, and then I'm going with a group of girls to the show. And initially we were like, okay, do we start this prep on like Tuesday in hopes that it'll be done by Friday so I can go? Or do we start it Friday night? So then we had decided, okay, we'll wait till after the show and then we'll do it then. Well, then yesterday it was like, okay, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to do it now. And so now we're currently in the process of it. But it was just like, you know, you're planning your life event, like, you know, everything changes. You can't have like a consistent, you know, you have to be flexible and everything, you know, things come up and then you got to deal with that you weren't planning on. So I think that's like the grief of that, and like dealing with, not that other people don't have things that come up. I'm not saying that, but it's just a little different, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is a little different. I think, you know, again, not devalidating. Everybody has challenges, right? And these just happen to be yours and ours. I think there's an aspect you've hit on that I want to highlight it because I think, you know, like you said, nobody you know has had to bowel prep their child. And so your friends, your community in, you know, your kind of immediate circle, you tell them that and they don't know what that means. So therefore they can't really conceptualize how big of a deal this is and how much it changes and impacts your life. And yes, probably you have people that you'll, you know, hear it and share the story. And then they say that's a lot. But also like, I think there's many things in life until you see it firsthand, you can't really understand like how, you know.
I'm a colorectal nurse, so this is like not a new thing for me. Granted, new on a kid. I've never done it on a kid before, but like I work in colorectal, so like I can handle the bowel prep. But it was funny, like talking to my coworkers about it. They were like, "Oh man, you know, are you gonna put like a tablecloth under the crib? And what if you wake up and she's just like covered in poop and it's like all over the crib?" And I was like, you know, I didn't even think about that. But you know, like how we, you know, would prep for a patient, you know, you'd making lots of layers. So I was like, oh, I didn't even like think about it. So it's funny to have that aspect of it too, because they know what's coming. And my husband, he doesn't know what's coming. Like he has no idea what's about to happen.
What a thing to just be working on right now in life. Okay. Well, thank you for introducing yourself and sharing just kind of where you're at. And thanks for being here. All right, Annika.
Okay. So I am Annika Atkins. I started working with you, I think was it 2021 or 2022?
It might have been 2021 fall. That part's a little blur for me because 2021 at the end of the year is when Levi got diagnosed with a recurrence. So
I think it was that or like a little bit into 22.
It might be.
Yeah.
Either way.
It was a blur time for us both. It was a season for sure. But a little bit about our story. I have my husband and I have one child who is Ella, and she is 10 and a half. She has infantile Pompe disease, diagnosed at 4 months of age. So at that time, had a perfectly healthy baby at birth, and then she just started to fail around that 4-month period. And so sent us into ICU and trying to figure out what this was. Thankfully, we were able to have support by a team that could figure it out pretty quickly. Now they're doing infant screening, thankfully, and they're catching this much earlier. But at our time, that wasn't available. So she's gone through 2 bouts of immodulation of her immune system because her body, she has one way of treatment, which is through an infusion. So her body doesn't have the gene that processes glucose. So sugar starts to store up in the muscles, and it basically, kills muscle tissue, any tissue within the organ. So she has gone through quite a bit of change over the years. I mean, as we all face, highs and lows. She's really, at the beginning, we were pretty successful with getting on top of resources, and we had a good team. She was within the realm of Pompeii doing pretty well. And then when she hit about 8, that's when her body started creating antibodies. That's what I'm trying to say, against the medication that was keeping her going. So she started to quickly fail. And that was really traumatic and came with a bunch of different unexpecteds. So I guess I want to back up, though, because I didn't really introduce my husband in this whole thing, because he is definitely my other half. So I am married to Shane. Our story is we were high school friends. Then we reconnected 15 years later through Facebook. Fell in love.
Oh, good old Facebook, huh?
Woohoo!
Pulling through.
We're one of those, right? So yeah, we're the old school. But anyway, so he's been on this path too. He's an airline pilot, so that comes with challenges of him being here and not. Before I was in this journey, I actually was teaching medical ethics, of all things. So dental and medical. Mine was geared more towards dental, but my world has changed so much because I'm living it, which is so different than speaking about it. But going to the concept of grief and what I'm really feeling right now with the whole thing, and, it's kind of relating back to an experience with Ella just having an eye exam recently and seeing significant change with her eye exam. And, it's just so interesting because I've been through so many experiences with shock in a way from the healthcare side of things, like the person administering the test or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's my world, man. Big change is pretty quick. The unknowns, we don't exactly know why things are changing in the way they are. What's impacted it. She went through chemotherapy last year. Is it that? Is it the disease? But I think the grief part that I'm really sort of surprised is it's bringing up stuff from the past. So, my funny statement of a bog of eternal stench. I loved Labyrinth as a kid. It's a movie. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but in it, it's just this thing of things pop up, this stuff that's kind of sticks to you. And this trauma that comes from childhood, I was relating it to an experience I had as 6 or 7, that why am I thinking about or dealing with that on top of everything else that I'm dealing with in this moment? So oddly enough, an eye exam and the seeing significant change isn't a big, huge thing on the grand scheme of Ella's health journey, but it brought up all this other stuff that was something that happened very early on. So processing that, seeing grief as this odd thing that pulls different parts at you that you need to heal. I guess that's really kind of it, or at least, I don't know if you completely heal, but put a cocoon around it so that you can sort of help process. So in my own personal journey, I'm working with the therapist of really learning how to process. And I'm such a physical person. I know we talked a lot about this with you, Kara. You're the one that's got me going on this. I hated it at the time, but it's really been the most impactful thing of physically feeling it, because I'm great at pushing things down. But yeah, I don't know if that resonates with anybody else, but just how grief pulls things up that are not necessarily what you're dealing with right at the time.
No, actually, that's such a great point to bring up, because I think that maybe would surprise a lot of us until we're experiencing it. And then I don't know if I'd say it makes sense, but it is a common phenomenon in grief. And I was actually looking for a quote that actually addressed that same thing, even just further emphasizing that this is a very, I'm sure even your therapist is validating, this is how it goes. It's it's touching on a hurt from the past that maybe was bubbled. Like you said, maybe you just conveniently tucked it away. And the experiences that you're having now are kind of opening up that bubble and it's leaking out. And so interesting, then it's like almost like it's bigger than it might have been if we processed grief all along. And I think, you said, healing grief. I don't know if I won't say if that's the right word or wrong word, but I think that it speaks, I think, to the misconception that we grieve and then we're done and then we move forward. And I think so, like healing grief, I would say, is like creating a different relationship with what we're grieving. And so I think there is an aspect where things start to feel settled or that relationship just feels more balanced. I don't know. But I think, to your point, like sometimes we're then doing more in terms of addressing grief when even little things come up. So thanks for bringing that point up. Okay, I'm going to read a quote from the book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. This is by Frances Weller. It's a book I refer to a lot. I should say the subtitle, is that the right language? Yeah, the subtitle is Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. And I really love this book because he talks about an apprenticeship with sorrow. And it really changed the way I think about grief and really kind of helped me usher into this kind of bringing grief closer. And so I'm going to read this quote. We often hold grief at a distance, hoping to avoid our entanglement with this challenging emotion. This leads to our feeling detached, disconnected, and cold. At other times, there is no space between us and the grief we are feeling. We are then swept up in a tidal surge of sorrow and often feel as though we are drowning. I think what he's pointing to or kind of helping give voice to is like, there are events that happen, I think, that do sweep us away. I can think back to the day of diagnosis where there was that tidal wave, like where it was all the emotion at once. There was no bubbling. But then I think, even like Shantay, like you described like this, such a less tidal wavy moment, right? Like where there was just like this subtle knowing. And so first, I want to just kind of an open dialogue about this quote. And if there's anything you relate to or kind of are taking from it, I'm interested to hear if, because it talks about this feeling detached, disconnected, and cold. And what I notice, I guess we can call it a pattern at this point. For myself, we've been through so many, what I would call big, very scary medical stuff. And I happen to be quite skilled at the kind of going into survival mode, soldier mode, where, you kind of do disconnect from that, all the emotion and just really, operate from a different place. And it's in the time, like I call it, and I've talked about this on the podcast quite a bit. It's the thawing, or is it the thawing? I think that's the right language. It's the thawing out process, like coming down from that, like kind of encapsulation of the emotions that I struggle the most. And I think it's because there's like this disconnection from myself and everybody around me. And that for me is probably my most hated feeling, is being disconnected. So I think that there's maybe a necessary flow, like I think it's a normal process and a gift that I can kind of go into survival mode. I think we all have the ability to do that. Like that is a God-given gift that our bodies know how to protect itself from the things that it just is too much to handle. But that like process of moving away from that is the time that is for me is the most difficult. And I think it's that disconnection for me that really stands out in this grief process, in the process of them becoming reconnected. So I don't know what stands out to y'all, but I'd love to hear.
So I think what resonated was, like you said, the survival mode and like the grief at a distance. So I feel like I'll go into like survival mode and then I can like hang there for so long, or I'll mask it with other things and busy with other things. And then I'll like be alone and no one's around me. And then that's where I let my feelings out. So usually it's in the car, like when I'm driving home and I'm alone and I have maybe a little bit of time to myself, or like a shower or something. But I feel like I'm like that grief at a distance is definitely like, it's just kind of hanging out there, like kind of pushed over there for a while until like you got to like kind of deal with it, I guess, or feel it, I think.
Feel it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think like that title of surge of how it said the title of surge of sorrow. So I think yeah, like it just kind of like builds up. Then it's like you just kind of got to let it, feel it, and like realize that like validate the feelings that you're feeling, and then kind of just process them, and not that you're gonna fix the problem by any means, but just to kind of get the feelings out that you're feeling
Yeah. It
and the
reminds
frustration.
me that term title surge of sorrow. If I think back to the episode I did specifically on grief, I talk about that grief is not getting over or getting through, it's like letting in. And so if I think about this tidal wave of sorrow, it's letting in this like expansive, even like I think about a literal tidal wave, how like intimidating it is and how shifting it is, and letting that in versus kind of like trying to outrun it. And I don't know, I just, to me, the visualization is valuable, and feeling like we're drowning sometimes.
Yeah, I think what's coming up on for me is because I hear that term, you may have even spoken about this, but resilience, we're supposed to be resilient. We can power through that cold, detached. It does serve a purpose, but I've recently been looking back at photos during different times of like hardship. And it's almost like I didn't recognize myself. Like you can tell that you're not totally present. And I think you look back of, wow, realizing the impact that probably had to everybody around, like whether it be Ella, my husband, it's what I felt like I had to do at that time. But looking at it from the framework of more like, okay, adaptability, like I want to just get back to myself, but I can't expand or shapeshift into this person that needs to be there in that moment. But I want to just be able to shapeshift back where I see myself in some of those photos. And I'm like, I went through months just in that soldier mode, and that's time lost. And not to say that you have a choice in it, or that, like you said, it is serving a purpose, but yeah, like I just, it's a horrible feeling. It's a horrible place to sit. And it does feel like you're drowning, but people around you in those moments are wanting you to be resilient, wanting you to be like power through. And the stronger you are that you project to other people,
Oh, I see
the
what you're
better
saying. Yeah.
they see you coping. But the reality behind the wall is I'm not coping that well.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So I think you're saying it's actually pretty easy to put on the face of resilience in the face
Yes.
of survival. And you look back and you can tell, and even maybe even like remember, and I've had this experience too. I have actually, it's on my desktop screen. It's like this picture of me and Levi, and I was so young, man. So youthful.
Yeah. Those
And I'm
wrinkles
like,
weren't there, right?
I know, man. Fine. And I can see it in my face that I have a smile on my face, but I also know looking back is like I was like a shell of a person. I
Yeah.
had no idea how to do any of the things that I've learned over the last, what are we at, like 13, 14 years. And it's really interesting to look back. And I think you make such a good point is that like, it's almost like we are in some ways in deep freeze. And so like our lives keep going and we're partially actually like not there. We've encapsulated this part of us. And I think that is something to grieve, to be like, we've lost. I do like look back at my third son's first year. And quick backstory is that so I was 10 weeks pregnant with my third son at the time of Levi's diagnosis. And so that whole first year of his life, like we were in survival mode and wasn't a great time to bring. I mean, I'm so glad that he came into my life right then. I needed that brightness and light. And I don't remember most of his first year. And I don't like to necessarily advertise that to him, but it's something to grieve. Like I'm not going to get those memories back. And, maybe things will come back when I look at pictures, but yeah, really good points. You would say something, Alyssa?
Yeah. Well, I have two things. One, I totally feel that. Like, I forgot to be the tooth fairy this week. So my daughter was like, I was at work. My husband had to deal with it, but like, she was so upset. And then so we had to make up this story, like about how the tooth fairy was busy. And then they came the next night. But it was like, oh my gosh, I felt bad because I felt like I let her down too. But also, Annika, like, how do you feel like you dig yourself out of that? Like that space?
So now
Because it's not easy. I feel like it takes a really long time.
It takes a lot. And I think sometimes, depending on the situation so this is just my personal experience with it. And I think in the heat of some moments, you just have to be present. You don't have the resiliency at that point to do much more than just survive. And then there will be this sort of shift where you can start to take moments to process. So for me, I have to cry. I have to really get in there and grieve because I carry it a lot inside. And how do I do that? I'm processing more through therapy. That's been a real help for me because I probably blubber through it with tears a lot, but it feels good to just have that release. And then physically moving helps, meditation helps, finding safe spots. So like visualization for me works a lot. So if I'm in the heat of a moment, so an example, my daughter had a medical emergency on her one vacation. We got to Hawaii. We were meta flighted to another island and whole thing with that. But sort of focusing on moments of visualization of calm, peace, just getting my headspace so I don't just get into like that drowning. Because I know how low I can go. And yes, you need to let yourself feel it. You need to let yourself get to experience it. But there also is a component to it where you don't want to let yourself get to that drowning point where and I don't know if it's not that you're unable, but it takes a lot more to get out of the hole.
Yeah, I think what I would say is it's so far out of reach from where you're at.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would say therapy has been a huge tool for me, even in this last year. It's interesting because, like I've mentioned, like we've been doing this for, I don't know, 13, 14 years. And even just this year, I have been able to grieve things that I wasn't even present to like before. And so I think there are these onion layers. And what I want to put in also is that it's a skill to do all these things. And like you said, you've learned to use tools like meditation, but there's many different modalities that help us process these things. And it's a skill that we can get better and better at. So, because I think, I don't remember who said, but like it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can take a lot of time, but it doesn't have to. And so I wanted to kind of put that in there because I think that could kind of add into like it's intimidating or hard or we'll never get there. And that's not necessarily true. I'm going to move into reading the next quote from the same book, but this is actually kind of about a different book, which is kind of funny. But it kind of speaks to what we're talking about. So I want to put it in now. Particularly, I want you guys to listen through, like recognizing that, and Andy, you mentioned this, is that having a safe place to do this work is so important. Yes. And so that's where I think I want to read this quote. Okay. In Bouncing Back, psychotherapist and neuroscience expert Linda Graham reveals how bonding and belonging nourish resilience. She relates to how our sense of connection affects our ability to regulate our internal states during crisis and stress. She writes, the process of being seen, understood, and accepted by an attuned, empathetic other engenders a sense of genuine self-acceptance, a feeling that we are profoundly okay. Well, first, I just want to kind of, hear what stands out to you, if anything, in what I just read.
I can go first. So actually where I am right now is like one of my spaces. So in my basement, I've kind of created like a little office desk area. So I try and get up in the morning, ideally before my kids. I'm kind of off a routine the last couple of weeks because I was on vacation. And I feel like whenever I go on vacation, then I get off my like routine. So I feel like I'm a better mom if I get up before my kids, which is sometimes hard to do. But sometimes, and I don't do this every day, but sometimes it's like mixed, here and there. But I feel like things that I have in this space would be like, I have like a gratitude journal that I try to do. Even if I'm at work, like I'll sit in my car and do it before I like go into work. I also do like a devotional, like a really small, like a mom, like busy mom devotional I can always like relate to. It's funny how like, I really needed this today. Like somehow it hits the topics right every time, I feel like. So that I also like will get up and I'll work out in this space. Sometimes I have like a kind of like a vision board created with different quotes from different people. Some of them like special needs mom like groups, or I went to a retreat and I got like different pins. And so I have a pin up here that says like I am enough. I have some drawings from my kids. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but Amanda Owen has this gratitude journal.
I contributed to it actually.
Yeah, and I love it. So it's like different special needs, moms. And so I think that's really unique. And I mean, I've had this for a long time, and I usually end up taking it like when I have some respite time, I'll like take it out like when I do coffee and I'll do a page. It's not like I sit and do that like multiple times a week. But that's one thing that I have. Sometimes I have a friend that has created a bunch of like meditations. I also have, this is going to sound funny, but I made a vision board and I never get it done in January, right? Because January is so busy after the holidays. But I do feel like it's fun and it helps me like be more creative and just get in touch with myself, even if there's like special needs mom stuff on the vision board, but it's in my laundry room. I have it in my laundry room, so I see it all the time. And so it's just fun to, see. And then I have like just different books and pictures and things like that. But it's kind of like my space to, just have my own space. That's not like, I mean, the kids are down here, but it's something for me.
That's awesome.
So that's
I love that you've kind of cultivated over, you've kind of added to it and created this thing for you. Mm-hmm. Awesome.
I have to say, Kara, I'm being very serious here, but like my safe space and like where I really felt like a sense of belonging was really through our weekly groups. I've talked about it before. Like, I don't know a lot of moms in real life who can truly relate. And, I have great friends and I'll talk about things that I'm going through, but like someone mentioned earlier, like you don't quite understand, right? Unless you are in a similar situation. So your group is my safe space. Like, it's just the feeling of I can come in with, you said a phrase earlier, which I really like, the whispers of grief, right? Like nothing momentous needed to have happened in the past week, but I can come in with these little, something happened at the store and this is how I feel. And then there is also what is it? The tidal wave. It's nice that there is a space where I can process both. So, the quote about needing that like sense of belonging, like absolutely. And yeah, I found it in your group.
I'm so happy to hear that. I think it's like the gift, of all the hell that, I've had to watch Levi experience and, therefore also have experienced a lot is that I get to be in a space like this and have a role like this. So
and what's interesting is that like every mom, like our cases or not cases, sorry, like our kids, it's completely different, right? We don't have one with the exact same diagnosis, but you relate. Like anytime someone says something, it's like, I can relate to that. I think I understand what you're feeling. So I think that's been really like interesting and like surprising to see too.
And I think that's what gives the experience of being seen, right? Is when that, well, because I think contextually, like we'll talk about the group, is that everybody is there because they have a common life circumstance of having a child that has any type of disability, special needs, medical complexity, whatever. And that sets the stage to know that when you share something, you believe that they're going to deeply understand you. Therefore, you have this deep experience of being seen like you don't have anywhere else. And I'm saying you, but like we don't have anywhere else. And that's, I think, where, I read this quote because I feel like it describes the genuine self-acceptance and like safe enough, strong enough, a feeling that we're profoundly okay. And I think it's pretty profound. I love that word, that we can have these situations in life where we do not know the futures of our children. We do not know if they'll walk or talk and all the things. And yet to still recognize that we can still have the sense of being profoundly okay and really recognizing that we're not profoundly okay because everything's going great with our kids. We're profoundly okay because that's who we are. Like that's our state of being and our identity. And to me, that shift and kind of recognizing and doing the work to kind of get to the place where we feel safe enough, strong enough, and so profoundly okay, that is essentially the pathway to peace. Not to spoil it for anybody, but like that is where we will get peace. And, for many of us, there's a spiritual component of that, of like the biggerness of life, that it's not just the here and now, it's beyond that. And I think that also is like really reckoning with how we can have peace when things are not okay. So any other, thoughts that are coming up from what I've shared, or of course the passage I read?
Well, I think I will second what was said about, as where I am in our journey, it's the importance of community, and a community that will go deep with you. So like with talking about grief here, I understand how this group and with Kara, we have this connection that is just, you don't find it really out there on the grand scheme of things, and you're trying to seek it, but trauma dumping on your friends just doesn't work. Like people
Trauma
run
dumping.
from
I never
you,
heard
right?
of that. But wait, no, I want to tell you the story. They're like, too much.
Too much. And honestly, that's my life is seriously, there's so many of those scenarios that I want to share with. That's my life. Like I spent all my life in this world of medical and insurance and you name it, that's doctor's appointments. And so to have people in a community and it's interesting because I do feel such a strong bond with these people, even though I may never see you in person. It's just that we can go deep and we understand what we're dealing with every day. But I also have been in a spot in my life before all of this where I've had communities that just didn't quite work, if that makes any sense. So it's finding your tribe is such an important part of this whole journey. And once you found it, it's a profound gift, but it's not always easy either. I mean, I'm thankful we have things like this in podcast. We have some things that we didn't have before 10 years ago, even really, that I knew of. I just remember, like trying to seek this stuff out. And it was like, you would go to a meeting around the disease, but it wasn't this kind of thing.
Like obviously social media, you can go both ways, but I feel so grateful to be parenting in the generation that we are right now and have access to this, because if I didn't have podcasts or groups like this, like I would feel so much more isolated. Like I think about the women that, were kind of like the pioneers, like 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, and like all the things that they have accomplished. And it's going to like, I don't know. I also think it's really interesting to see like where we're going to be in another 30, 40 years. Like, like our generation, where are we going to be compared to like the women before us? But I seriously don't know. I'm in like because our diagnosis is so rare, we have an international support group, and that is like a lifesaver, because obviously parents, you know more things that if you go to a doctor and they've never heard this before, like dealing with kind of what we are this week, I just hopped on there, like asked some questions like, hey, how far did you guys have to go? And I got multiple responses. And that also helps, I think, like build, like this is going on in this rare community, or these are things that they've dealt with in the past. Like, I think we should do an x-ray, or, I think that would be beneficial versus, whatever. But I can't imagine not having like that easy connectability.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's easy either. You have to search. And if you don't search, you don't find it. If I didn't have Facebook, I would be disconnected from a lot of stuff. So I think that's, we're really fortunate to have that platform.
No, I certainly, again, like you said, there's both sides of all the social media stuff, but I've recently even leaned into some sampling of brain tumor support groups, just the stage that we're at in life. I'm like, you know what? Like I've never leaned into this particular aspect, and I'm going to give it a go. And I think, Annika, I think what you were saying is like, not all the groups feel what you're looking for. Like in my own experience recently, some of them were a total miss. I'm like, it wasn't what I needed, what I wanted. And I think we're actually one of the things that led me down the path creating this space that I did is that like I'll speak to, we have an amazing group. It's called craniopharyngioma. It's the brain tumor group. It is an amazing group. And 99.9 of the conversation is treatment focused. And there's so much value there, like to be able to ask the questions of, these people that have been through something so similar. But as the caregiver, as the mom, it doesn't give me what I need to be the caregiver, to manage it. And so that's where I think it's unique to find a space where like actually it speaks to like who you are versus what we do as caregiving moms. So, okay, well, I want to honor the time commitment and start to wrap us up. And so I will invite any last thoughts, just kind of as we close out, anything on your mind that you want to share as we close this out.
I don't have anything, but thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming to my party, guys. Actually, excuse me. Thanks for coming to the Huddle. It's not a party. And
our mantra. We got to think of
I know. I was just going to say that. This is the time where we all put our arms in our hands and then we like do our cheer. And so I'm trying to think, I'm like, we're going to come up with a way of like soliciting, what's it like, people throwing in ideas. So this is your call forth, everyone listening, that we need a mantra or a cheer. Maybe ChatGPT would help us. But it has to be short.
That's my first, like, let's just go to ChatGPT. Like,
yeah, right. But it has to be short. I'm not great with memorization, as in like I'm really bad at it. So it's gonna have to be short. Ooh, the one I pasted on a t-shirt when we were doing fundraising for Levi for his treatment a couple years ago is "Together is the only way." And
I love that
quote came to me because
good.
it literally was. So I reached out to this guy I barely knew. Well, I mean, kind of knew him. And he had DJ'd an event that I had gone, a fundraising event. And I was like, all right, Chris, like, hey, would you consider like DJing and putting music at this event that I'm doing for my son? Like basically a you're going to go into surgery again party. And he was like, of course. And at the bottom of the email, in all caps, he wrote, "Together is the only way." And just like his fierce, like, of course, it was that I needed because it was hard to ask. It was like, I mean, it was not a great season, right? And to have people show up, that makes all the difference. So, okay, that's going to be our fill in unless we find something better. So, together is the only way. All right, everyone, hands in. We're going to do it, guys. We're going to do it. And on 3, 1, 2, 3. Together
is the
only way.
Okay. We'll work on that, you guys. We'll work on that. Okay. All right. With that, we'll see y'all in the next episode. Thanks, guys.